Hey guys, thanks for tuning into today's video. I'm going to be discussing in depth who Joe Biden's choices are for the VP nominee, who the most likely people are that are on his shortlist. And now after George Floyd's death in Minneapolis and a lot of people coming out and criticizing Amy Klobuchar's relationship with police in the state of Minneapolis, she withdrew herself from consideration to be Joe Biden's vice president. And she asked Joe Biden that he pick a woman of color. So this has definitely narrowed the options for the Biden field and has left it to around four or five women realistically that could be the vice president. So I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about them. First of all, it's definitely very important to have diversity of age, diversity of opinion, but also just racial diversity on a ticket that will be the highest governing office in the US. It would be the first time that a woman of color would be in the office. Just black people in general in the country are definitely underrepresented, and because Biden has already openly said that it will be a woman, to have a woman of color on the ticket, there's really nothing but benefits from this. However, the options that Biden now has are definitely narrowed. So first I'm going to talk about Elizabeth Warren and why a week ago she was being considered to be the front runner and now she is kind of fallen off that list. Elizabeth Warren had the highest approval rating out of any vice president candidate, higher than Amy Klobuchar, higher than Kamala Harris, who is now considered to be the front runner. In head-to-head polling, Elizabeth Warren was topping the list. He actually improved Joe Biden's lead over Donald Trump. And not so many candidates did that. A lot of that is just because Elizabeth Warren has a really high name recognition and she's also a progressive, and so that would sort of energize the progressive wing of the party. And this is a point that I want to get into, is there are sort of two ways that Joe Biden can go with this vice presidential nomination. What he's done with the vice president is he has essentially made the position to where it's a national spotlight. It's all eyes on Biden. He has built it up a lot because he has received the nomination so early and he's not on the campaign trail, so he has put a lot of emphasis on who the vice president is going to be. There's a lot of focus on it, and what he can do with this is essentially fill holes that the campaign has. So Joe Biden is old, a lot of people see him as a moderate, so what he could do is put a younger, more progressive candidate, or maybe just a more progressive candidate, or just a younger candidate, or put a person of color on the ticket, and so that will definitely fill a lot of the holes that the Biden campaign is lacking and that they don't have necessarily. Another way that they could do it is to ensure moderate support. So a lot of people are worried that Joe Biden is going to enact progressive policies or something. So a lot of pundits are saying that Joe Biden could put a moderate on the ticket, somebody that has close ties with law enforcement, that maybe wants to see change but doesn't want to see the sweeping change that a majority of Americans disapprove of. I personally don't think that that is a smart road to go. Joe Biden is already seen as a moderate in US politics, and he's not going to appeal to any Republican voters. Donald Trump already appeals to Republican voters overwhelmingly. By around 95%, he has an approval rating of Republicans. So that means that there's really no use for Joe Biden to try and go over and spend a lot of time and money going after those Republican voters when he could energize the strong and large Democratic base that there is in this country. He could appeal to progressives, he could appeal to people of color to turn out in ways that they did not turn out in 2016, but they turned out in 2008 and 2012 for Barack Obama. He could just re-energize that wing of the party. And so that is actually why I think that Elizabeth Warren would have been a good option. However, now, given the circumstances, and with what Amy Klobuchar said, she did actually bring up a really good point that we could really benefit from having a person of color on the ticket. And so now it just doesn't seem appropriate that Elizabeth Warren would be the vice president. Additionally, Elizabeth Warren is from Massachusetts, and Massachusetts actually has a Republican governor. And so that would mean that her Senate seat would likely be filled with a Republican appointee. So this would mean that for Democrats to take control of the Senate in 2020, they would need to win an additional seat. Realistically, Democrats are not going to net, 5 or 6 seats if they're losing Alabama and Massachusetts. It's just really hard to see that happening. So I'm going to go into now some of the candidates that are being strongly considered, and the first one is Kamala Harris. So Kamala Harris was previously a little lower on the list, but now she has risen to the number 1 slot. She is a senator from California, questioning Brett Kavanaugh specifically. She really went after him and she built a national profile off those sorts of things. She ran for president and then she actually peaked at number 2 on the campaign trail. She proved herself to be an excellent debater. Some of the caveats in her campaign do come with her history with law enforcement. She was constantly criticized on the campaign trail, and that is one of the number one reasons that her campaign faltered and then she actually had to drop out of the campaign. It's just because of her history with law enforcement. She had some problems there being tough on crime while she was the district attorney in California. Additionally, she went after Joe Biden pretty hard on the campaign trail, and that could backfire for the Biden campaign. A lot of people could see Kamala Harris going after Joe Biden as kind of a, well, maybe Joe Biden isn't sincere. He's just making everything a political move, or there could be other implications of that. I don't know. However, Kamala Harris is an extremely strong candidate. She's proven herself to be competent, and she's also ready. So she has a lot of experience. And Joe Biden stressed that he needs someone who will be ready on day one. Joe Biden is extremely old, and Kamala Harris is younger and more lively and vibrant, and she's also a person of color. And so she definitely does have a lot of the things that the Biden campaign is lacking. I just think that her history with law enforcement and her going after Biden so heavily could prove to be problematic, but we will see. The next person I would talk about is Val Demings. Now, Val Demings is a representative from Florida. She represents a district in Orlando, and she built a national profile after her involvement in the impeachment hearings. She was one of the first people to come out for impeachment very publicly. She was the police chief of Orlando for 3.5 years. Profile really comes into play. So there are pros and cons to this that people are seeing. A lot of people are saying, well, she has ties with law enforcement, but she's also openly calling for reform to law enforcement. So that proves that, she sees the system, she understands it, she knows it, and she has experience with it, but she also sees that it needs to change, and she wants it to change, which a majority of Democratic voters want. However, while she was police chief, Orlando did have a lot of problems with using excessive force, I guess. So they used force at around 3 times the rate that neighboring cities' police departments used. There was also a trial where one of the police officers used excessive force, and Val Demings sided with the police officer, and she sort of publicly came out on the side of the police officer, and the victim actually won. So that could also come up to sort of haunt the Biden campaign if they choose Val Demings. However, Val Demings is a very strong candidate. She is a very well-spoken person. She doesn't necessarily have the national profile that someone like Kamala Harris does. However, people do speculate that she could help Biden in Florida, which is a key swing state. If Biden was able to win Florida, then he could really give up some of the other states like Wisconsin or even Pennsylvania. And that sort of regional advantage doesn't necessarily always pan out, especially with someone who's not going to have just a really large national profile. So Val Demings is a representative from Florida. In 2012, Mitt Romney chose Paul Ryan, a representative from Wisconsin, and then he still did not win the state. And there's kind of a lot of examples of that where people pick a VP that is regional to try and help them regionally, and it doesn't necessarily work. I think a much more effective measure would be to use someone ideologically who is sort of separate from you, fill in those holes that the campaign does not have. And that is where my personal favorite pick comes into play, Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams, she is a representative from the state of Georgia. She is the Georgia Senate Minority Leader. In 2018, she ran for governor, and she was unsuccessful in unseating Brian Kemp, who is now the governor. However, she then went on to start her own organization called Fair Fight, and she is really trying to bolster voter turnout, but also just get rid of voter suppression in Georgia and give everybody an equal chance to vote. In 2018, there were not enough polling lines. People were purging voter rolls in the state of Georgia, especially with communities of color. Communities of color did not have enough polling machines, and there were extremely long lines. She started this organization to overcome it, and I think that emphasizes that Stacey Abrams definitely puts a focus on disenfranchised voters, on voters of color that are underserved. She wants to give them a voice in a system that has not always worked for them. Additionally, she is young, she's well-spoken, she's a business owner, she's an author, a very impassioned, emphatic speaker. So I definitely think that Joe Biden could have a lot to gain by putting Stacey Abrams on the ticket. Additionally, she has more of a national profile than someone like Val Demings. So while Val Demings comes from Florida, and people are saying that she could help in Florida, if you're looking for someone who has a a regional advantage, I definitely think Stacey Abrams is more appropriate. She was able to turn out minority voters in Georgia by up to 3 times the rate that they had in previous elections. Like she said, in Georgia, in 2014, there were 1.1 million black voters. In 2018, there were 1.2 million black voters for Stacey Abrams alone. So she was able to outperform from the numbers in 2014, outperforming the numbers that were voting just for her. And that's with significant problems with voter suppression. So that's definitely something to consider. You want someone who has a proven record of turning out voters in large numbers, who has a proven record of fighting for voters of color, someone who could appeal to younger or even progressive voters, and someone who's extremely well spoken. And like I was saying about that regional advantage, she's from Georgia, which is going to be kind of a competitive state, and that could also help in Florida and North Carolina, especially in North Carolina more than I think Val Demings could, because being a congressional representative from a state like Florida that is so big, that has 27 congressional districts, being one of 27, I don't think necessarily helps as much as people are going to claim it does. However, this is just my opinion. I could be super wrong. The last person that I want to talk about is Keisha Lance Bottoms, and that is the mayor of Atlanta. She was elected in 2018, and she has gained a national profile dealing with the protests in Atlanta. She has handled them, that a lot of people have said, very well. So she has experience running a city. She has experience dealing with civil unrest, sort of with these Black Lives Matter protests. She's well spoken. However, she raises some of the same qualification issues that Stacey Abrams does. Her highest level of office is at this city level. So Stacey Abrams was at the state legislator level. Keisha Lance Bottoms, another Georgia legislator, has a similar thing. So both of these women are sort of seen as rising stars in the Democratic Party, especially in Georgia politics. And I think there's definitely a future for them in the party, even if they don't get the vice president nomination. However, I do think that Stacey Abrams would be the best choice, but we will see what happens. So those are the people that I think are most likely to get the vice president nomination. There are some other people who are being thrown around. Susan Rice and Tammy Duckworth are 2 people that I've seen recently. The shortlist is definitely smaller, but I do think that Joe Biden has a potential to do some really good things with this vice president pick, bring some much needed diversity into federal government, into the second highest office in the country. So whoever it's going to be, any of these women on this list are extremely competent, and they would be very good. It's just a matter of which direction he decides to take the campaign. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe. I'm trying to get to 50 by the end of the month. Also comment suggestions that you would have for another video. I actually really enjoyed making this one and sort of researching different vice president candidates. So yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. Alright, bye.